Hi everyone, it's Isabella here and welcome back to the channel. So today's video, as you guys can tell, we are diving into the new Prime Video documentary that's called Shiny Happy People, where they cover the Duggars. So here's the deal. If you guys are new here, I'm someone that covers problematic companies, scams, cults, anything sketchy in history, just literally anything problematic and fascinating we cover here on this channel. I have been dying to cover the Duggars for a good long while. With this documentary, I was like, this is the perfect time to do it. So for those of you who don't have Prime Video and aren't able to watch, what I'm going to be doing in this video is pretty much covering so many different things that are discussed about the Duggars, specifically my personal thoughts about it, and so much more. So before we hop into today's video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell button down below. And without further ado, let's get into this. So the Duggar documentary is a 4-part series. I'm going to be honest, each episode was around 30 to 40 minutes long. There was 4 of them, and I watched the entire thing twice. So I watched it a lot. I took tons of notes, and so with this entire documentary, it kind of covers 2 big specific topics. So of course it covers the Duggars, but it actually specifically goes deep into the belief system that the Duggars really focused on. What the belief system they follow is IBLP, which is a very fascinating belief system, and it is actually created by Bill Gothard. Now this falls under the category of the extremist fundamental Christian stuff, you know what I'm talking about. So I will be covering that in the future on my channel, so definitely stay tuned. So specifically, I'm covering everything in the documentary that was specifically the Duggars, their behaviors, and essentially what happened behind scenes when the cameras were off, essentially. So real quickly, if you don't know who the Duggars are, they are a very religious family that got very popular, a TLC show that started off with whatever number of child they were on, kids and counting. So I think it was like 14 kids and counting at first. I believe that's what it was. They started off in 2008. They had many different seasons. However, that version of the show was actually stopped due to some major issues, which we will get into in a second. Let's kind of go back in time and let's really kind of recover what the documentary discussed, where they went over the beginning, start, and foundation to the entire Duggars. So Michelle Duggar, who is the mom, and Jim Bob, who is the dad, they met when they were younger. So fun fact, actually, which I did not know, Michelle Duggar actually was not heavily involved with this belief system when she was younger. So for example, she did everything that she pretty much teaches her kids not to do. She wore pretty much whatever she wanted. She did whatever she wanted. She dated whoever she wanted, and pretty much acted like, in my personal opinion, a very normal young person. Now, she actually met Jim Bob. He was 19 and she was 17. And apparently he was the one that exposed her to this belief system. And she decided to take it on. She was apparently very inspired by it and decided to entirely change her ways, which I'm going to tell you right now from personal experience, never change your belief system for a man, or just don't ever change your belief system entirely like that for a partner in general. It's just, it's never worth it. They got married finally and they decided to have children. So they at first were going to have their first child, which is Josh Duggar. Now, if you guys don't know, Josh Duggar is going to be a huge topic of conversation and was a major topic of conversation in this documentary because he is also a huge predator, which again, we'll get to in a minute. So they had their first child, Josh, who was a golden child essentially, and they got back on birth control. However, this was actually a turning point for them because they realized that apparently birth control is a bad idea and they wanted to leave it up essentially to God with how many children that they have. Apparently, and I quote, they were going to keep having kids until her body told her to stop. So until you, what, almost die? I don't even understand that. I think that's horrific and abusive to her in all forms. It's very sad to me because going through this from the very beginning, I feel like you can see that, well, yes, I do believe Michelle was a perpetrator in many aspects with her children and other people's children with their teachings, etc. But I also think that she was a victim of this belief system. And it's just very sad and very up. Jim Bob actually got involved with politics. So before, when they had a bit of a smaller family, Jim Bob actually got really fascinated with the political world and wanted to kind of get involved. He actually became a Republican state representative for Little Rock, had a lot of specific strict beliefs. He was very pro-life. It was honestly very just highly sexist, homophobic, all of those things. Yeah. Anyways, with the absolute size of their family though, they actually got some attention from the press. So there was actually a photo that was taken of the family and with the sheer amount of children that they had, which actually led to them having a documentary made about them that was put on Discovery. That actually performed really well, which then in return led to the TLC series that started in 2008 that developed into the however many kids they were on and counting. Walk through how an entire large family grew and developed and how they were still put together. People were highly fascinated by the idea of a family being put together, having things organized with that many children, grocery shopping, laundry, everything, and not to mention, they appeared to be extremely wholesome, well-behaved, and overall, one of the biggest things on that list was very good Christian children. But what's so devastating and heartbreaking about this is there was so much dark reality and truth to the reason why those children behaved the way they do, and so much was starting to get aired out and exposed in this documentary. So really quickly, I want to say that in this documentary, it was honestly shocking and fascinating how Jill, which is the fourth oldest, decided to speak up and be interviewed for this, which is insane to think about how you go from being in a belief system and now you are a part of exposing your own family and the abuse that you went through. I can't even imagine. Also, there was many other people as well, like former friends, Jim Bob's sister, and just many other people who knew the Duggars were speaking out against them. As we go through the documentary, we learn that there was a big, heavy agenda around why the show was happening. The Duggars apparently had a very strict belief system, and they didn't even believe in like secular music, television, that kind of stuff, right? It was kind of interesting that they were on a TV show. However, it was revealed that they had a goal of ministering and spreading their religious beliefs to other people. Goal for this belief system, the IBLP, was to pretty much expose this and recruit anyone that they could into this belief system and essentially change the country and just overall the world in general. So the entire belief system, which I'll again dive into in another video, it's an entire can of worms, but they wanted to expose people to this perspective and to this belief to get more people to fall into it and fall into the order of what Bill Gothard wanted. It was, oh God, it was horrible. And so that was something that they tried to highlight a lot, and they specifically requested for TLC to not edit out, was the religious aspects, the faith teachings, and the conversations about what they believed in. If we actually pay attention to the setup of the show, when we look at it, the women and children, specifically though, the girls were the ones that were honestly keeping the show running and making it fascinating. Most high-performing episodes were the wedding episodes, dating episodes, and the birth episodes. There's actually multiple births that were shown of course, Michelle popping out one kid after another, but even her daughters that ended up having children as well. So they got insanely high ratings and it just grew in popularity. People got so inspired by them and actually started falling into their belief system, started trying to raise their children like them, and even actually thought about having more children and naming their own kids after some of the Duggars. Yeah, it was a wild story. So many people were again quite impressed by how the children were so well behaved and they listened, and oh my God, how do they get that? And in all reality, there was a plethora and many layers of abuse and control that was going on, along with the teachings from the Bill Gothard bullshit. The development and raising of these kids was highly isolating, abusive, and overall just controlling. So when you see these children and really pay attention, it was all about fear and not actually about them wanting to listen. They were essentially, from what I could see, scared into silence. A lot of these teachings actually started with homeschooling. So all the children were homeschooled, and they were homeschooled with the curriculum that was created by Bill Gothard. So Bill Gothard was again, religious individual who decided to give answers to everyone. So with many different times throughout history, there have been different points in religious individuals' lives where sometimes things get a little, iffy, and they're like, oh my God, wait a minute. Am I doing everything wrong? Am I doing this bad? Should I be listening to this music? Am I sinning all the time? And of course, there's some questioning. And when there's questioning in a belief system, somebody needs to pop in and give answers. Otherwise, that questioning can lead to too much questioning, which can lead to deconstruction. So of course, Bill Gothard was the perfect asshole to show up and give the answers to everyone and all these vulnerable people who so badly needed someone to tell them what to do. So Bill Gothard showed up with essentially teachings for everyone. Now, of course, these came at a price. Don't get me wrong, they were expensive as hell. But these teachings ranged from different conferences, courses, and ways of raising your children and giving them an education. Now, this education was not education in any capacity, okay? This education was religious based, and it was all about literally teaching children to obey, and all of the little intricate aspects of this are shocking. The IBLP belief system was really heavy on homeschooling because they wanted to, and I quote, prevent you from getting brainwashed in public school, which I'm going to tell you right now, actually funny enough, fun fact about me if you guys don't know, I actually was someone where I was homeschooled up until 3rd grade. Literal reason why I was put into public school was my mom actually got sick and she wasn't able to homeschool us anymore. But even my mom and I had a conversation the other day about how happy we were that happened, because there was a really big difference for many people from homeschooled kids to public school kids, but additionally, highly religious homeschooled kids versus homeschool kids without, the religion involved. Now, they were a firm believer in this umbrella system where it was God, then it was like your pastor, or of course, Bill Gothard, that asshole. Then it went to your husband, then it went to the wife and children. So as long as you followed the hierarchy and you listened to the person who was in charge and of authority of you, nothing bad would happen to you, which is ironic because many bad things happen to everyone, no matter what they did. Now, Bill Gothard actually claimed that this education was just as good as getting a high school diploma, and you also were getting it just as good as getting apparently prerequisites to a law degree and a medical degree. I was like, there is absolutely no flying way on this green earth that the damn wisdom preachings that you're teaching these kids are actual good enough education. In this documentary, they actually went on to say that majority of people were not getting, again, proper education, math, reading. It was all highly, heavily religious based, but specifically very about obeying and control. So honestly, from what we could see with these teachings and what was encouraged to the Duggars is this honestly removed actual education. And what we really come to see with situations like this is the less education someone has, the less they know, the less they can question, and it's harder for someone to get out of a cult like this. Now, of course, for people who so badly want to be able to raise their family up into a wholesome Christian family, this looked like a perfect answer. Now, all of this encouragement, not only from the conventions and teachings, but education was highly controlling. So specifically when it came to the girls, actually, there was a lot of control over what you could wear, what you could watch, what you could listen to. With anything, actually, when it comes to TV, the only real TV that you were encouraged to watch was specific programs made by IBLP. So you couldn't even watch anything outside of that, which is quite interesting because cult characteristics really highlight the idea of information control and preventing anyone from seeing anything else outside of what you have to teach them. Now, also fear-mongering was a massive aspect of this as well. So literally anything could lead you to giving a piece of your soul to Satan. Like, I'm not even kidding. They talked about rock music and how apparently that is horrible and that is giving your soul to Satan if you listen to it. Additionally, a lot of the ways that they were raised and taught was demonizing emotion. So for example, things like Winnie the Pooh was not okay to watch, according to some discussions, because apparently ER was embracing and okay with depression, even though depression's a real thing. And either way, anger even was a problem. You honestly could not have normal functions and you were forced into this toxic positive mindset. And if you thought of anything bad, sad, or anything, you had this fear that you were immediately just going to get sent to hell or you were never going to be able to be good enough. Also, there was a lot of curriculum that actually focused on essentially slut shaming women, which is so sad and devastating. So I know earlier I talked about controlling what people could wear. Honestly, a lot of times the controlling was literally majority of the times about the women and the girls. Anything they could wear could possibly lead a man astray. And honestly, it was their fault if they did, which is so devastating and a lot of victim shaming. If anything, there was some curriculum that would actually go out of their way to have kids look at photos of outfits that women would wear, and they would be asked what's wrong with the photo. And they would have to point out, oh, this part has some lace and that's seductive, or there's a shoulder showing. And honestly, the more that I look at this, I should be someone that should be UPS overnight express shipped to hell. Another absolutely sad but very problematic thing is they were essentially training these boys to believe that the women were the problem and they just literally did not have to fucking control themselves around women, which is horrible because they had a word that they would say if they were out in public to where I think if they said Nike, it was a signal essentially to the boys to look down and not look at a woman that was walking past them that was apparently showing too much. Good grief. Like, are you people okay? As I was looking through some of this, there was a specific quote that I saw in this documentary that was, this is funny as okay? Those who fall to her whoredom are stripped of resources and vibrancy of life. I would like to say whoredom, is that like a combination of whore and freedom? Because please put that on a t-shirt now. I want that. Now back to seriousness though, it gets even darker with their teachings and the way that they raise these children because allegedly you were taught that women can be a trap for literally anyone. And there was heavy amounts of victim blaming because it's your fault for seducing people. If you show too much, you were the one that led a man astray. And if something bad happened to you, well, you shouldn't have done that. They also were taught that you had spiritual gifts. Now, there was a little hierarchy that discussed what kind of spiritual gift that you would receive. And so a lot of the times people would fall into the prophet or the mercies. Now, very interesting because a prophet would be someone that would give, and put things on people, whereas a mercy would be the one that would always take and essentially take on other people's problems and not complain about it. And it's actually ironic because the prophets most of the time were the men men and the Mercies were the women. So kind of makes sense with the family dynamic that the woman took care of the children and took care of all the responsibilities and literally even took on the responsibility of the emotions of her husband. And the husband did absolutely whatever the he wanted. Another thing that was pointed out in the teachings for the Duggars' beliefs was being naked was so shameful and a sin. So inherently, there was something wrong with you already. And from all these teachings and beliefs, I think you can easily see the fear and honestly how probably terrified these kids were growing up. And additionally, the requirements to perform and behave in front of a camera. I can't even imagine the things that happen behind closed doors and the trauma that they're experiencing from all of this ridiculous controlling shit that they were taught. Now, we're getting into another really sad and dark part about this. So again, this entire video is very triggering, but we're going to be covering Josh Duggar, which I mentioned previously. We're talking about sexual assault, abuse, all of those things. So with that in mind, take care of yourself, take care of your mental health. But let's talk about Josh Duggar and the first situation that happened with him and assaulting children. Josh was accused of assaulting underage girls, 5 of them to be exact. Some of them were including his own sisters. They claimed that the victims had no idea that this was happening because Josh was doing it in their sleep. And apparently Josh decided to come forward to his parents and tell them about what he was doing. There are some speculations that the girls knew what was going on. His dad decided to take Josh and brought one of Jim Bob's friends at the time to go down to speak with a trooper. Now this trooper was going to listen to everything that Josh had to say. According to that former friend of Jim Bob, he listened in on the conversation and they told everything to the trooper. And apparently the trooper said, "That's bad, you know, but if you do that again, I'll come down full force on you." And nothing happened. And you want to know something that is very terrifying and disgusting is that same individual, who actually goes by the name of Trooper Hutchson, has actually been sentenced to 56 years in prison for child porn. Now also, there's allegations that that trooper was actually good friends with Jim Bob as well. So everything was swept under the rug. It was all able to pretend that they did something about it. And of course, in abusive systems like this, it was just swept under the rug and ignored. Now, apparently Josh was actually sent off to a work camp or something like that that was set up for troubled boys, and it was actually run by Bill Gothard. Now, let's be real here. When somebody is literally hurting children, work camp is not going to do anything. But they claimed to the public that he was healed, but they actually said to the public later on in other interviews, well, he's changed and he's better and he's learned. It was absolutely disgusting. Now, this actually all happened before the reality show even started. So the fact that they started a reality show and thought that they could pretty much hide that very scary secret without any child or anyone coming forward and telling anything was just insane. And again, the news finally did break. And what's heartbreaking was who took the fall for it? Of course, the victims. Jill Duggar actually was discussing how they were very adamant to try and solve the problem and essentially be able to get this out of the media and allegedly save the TLC show. Apparently, the focus was not on the victims, you know, Josh's sisters, but it was focused on making sure 19 Kids and Counting or whatever was still going to be ongoing and performing on TLC. We're encouraged and told to go on to Megyn Kelly's show on Fox News to go on the record for saying what happened and essentially defending Josh. Yes, so they went on to Fox News and discussed the entire situation and went out of their way to talk about this, but if anything, go out and defend their brother. In my opinion, just from watching this news segment, it clearly looked like they were honestly coerced, and it sounded like Jill was very coerced into doing that because she actually said how she 100% regrets doing it and she didn't want to live it and deal with it, but she was put under so much pressure, she felt like she had to be the one to fix it, even though she was flat out the victim. To no surprise, TLC was not happy about this either way, and they still dropped the entire family show. However, they did agree to make an extension of the show, which was going to work with the older siblings. So they would work with Jill and any other older sisters or siblings who started having children and having families of their own. Josh actually finally got married, which we'll cover here in a second. But while he was married, during all of the mix of this, he got caught and it was leaked that he literally got onto a website that was created for married people to cheat, but additionally, he slept with someone and tried to pay them a lot for them to keep quiet. Now, going back to the children and how they were raised though, because again, the abuse and the horrible things that happened did not stop there. There were so many other things that kept happening and that were actually discussed when it came to the gothard teachings and allegedly how the Duggars were raised. So a couple on this list actually was the older children were supposed to have a buddy system. And this is exactly why I 100% believe that having that many children is neglect and not normal. is you are negatively impacting the older children, and it is not normal for an older child to be a main parent, essentially raising a kid for you. That's not right. So apparently Michelle has discussed that once you're done weaning a child, you were able to essentially pass it on to the buddy system. So the buddy system was set up to where one of the oldest children was able to watch around 3 to 4 other kids or so. And so they were pretty much in charge of watching those kids, taking care of them and monitoring them and keeping them safe and literally everything, which one, that doesn't allow the kids to be kids. 2, that also gives the younger children more of a parental feel when it comes to their oldest sibling. And 3, it's just downright wrong if you cannot take care of all of your children like this. Each older sibling had a buddy system that was created for them. Now, this next part is absolutely devastating and so frustrating, but they also were a part of a belief system that was heavily encouraging hitting your children and spanking them and pretty much just getting away with abuse as long as you didn't get in trouble and you were taught on how to get away with it. Actually, a cousin of the Duggars vocalized that it was called encouragement. And so if they were misbehaving, apparently Michelle in her soft, sweet voice would say, "Do you need encouragement? I think you need encouragement." The children would be taken away and apparently allegedly get beat. It is honestly very stressful. Now, there were other mentions in this documentary of pretty much how to beat the will and the defiance out of your child. And there was different ways of doing that. So an example of this in the documentary was called blanket training. So what would happen is you would lay a child on a blanket and you would then put something that the child would want on the edge of that blanket, on the side, so where it would have to reach. And so if the child would reach, then you would essentially hit the child when it would reach. And then if the child didn't listen, you kept hitting the child until it stopped reaching for the item it wanted, like taunting the kid because it wanted something. The child was not even doing anything wrong, but it was a start of, they would do that to teach obedience. And that was a huge obsession, was obedience. Now, again, I would like to make this very clear when it comes to things like this, the amount of studies that literally say that it negatively impacts children and their growth and development is skyrocketing. Again, please take, for example, Harvard has a study on spanking, for example, and there's many other studies as well that discuss how this isn't something that's good. And if you want your child to fear you, that is a shitty parent. If you want your child to fear you and you don't want your child to develop into a healthy, emotional human being, hitting them, spanking, whatever you want to call it, is not normal or okay. There was also other representations in the documentary about how you can keep spanking and hitting your child essentially until they stop crying. And you can even apparently hold a spoon or whatever item you're using to hit the child with a little bit over, so the anticipation builds psychological fear in them, and that is apparently what works. And just punishment overall involved a lot with physical retaliation. Another very scary and toxic thing that I saw was Bill Gothard actually at a convention using a child as an example of how to do this. And again, they were highly involved with these teachings and spoke at these conventions. And one of these teachings showed Bill Gothard having a child up, and he was giving an example of how to uplift your child while simultaneously hitting your child. Now, he doesn't hit the kid on stage, but he gives an example of talking about how you're going to be a good man someday while the kid is bent over his knee and getting pretend slapped and in front of tons of people in a crowd after the kid is required to hug you. Now, Bill Gothard's like, oh, well, there's not a lot of, effort and love in that hug. And then pretty much encourages people to bend the kid over your knee again and keep hitting them, and then requests them to do the hug over again, which from what I can see, and again, I'm no psychologist, but that's pretty much encouraging and creating a foundation for you to be normalized to an abuser and think that this is normal for someone to do if they love you. Another really major and disgusting aspect of this was just the overall exploitation of the children in general. Now, you guys know I have a huge problem when it comes to showing children's lives off too much. I do not like the idea of even posting your child up too much on the internet. I have talked about internet safety, and it's a topic that I'm going to cover further on this channel, but it's a problem, right? And additionally, it's a problem with topics like family vloggers, for example, that overexploit their children and their personal lives and putting so much on the internet about their child when there are predators on the internet. And additionally, your child cannot consent. The fact that they were so comfortable with showing such personal stuff about their kids on TLC to make a lot of money. The exploitation actually still happened because Jill, going back to her as she's talking in her interview, she discussed how actually right before she got married to her husband, she was rushed to sign some documents. She was taught to obey, listened. She didn't question anything. She just signed and trusted her dad. And it turned out to be a contract that was a 5-year contract for when she got married. She would be required to carry on a show and have a show that followed her just like she did growing up that would talk about her life and be an extension and make the Duggars money. Now, she again did not know what that was at all, and she was very confused about it because a good while after that was when she actually found out and realized that that's what she signed. Now, another problematic exploitation was no one allegedly was getting paid for these episodes besides Jim Bob. That was it. So allegedly, it looks like there was around $850K that every single season was pulling Jill, who was showing so much of her life, and all the other children that were showing so much of their lives. They didn't get paid anything. They weren't making anything off of their own extension shows whatsoever. Everything was getting paid to Jim Bob. Additionally, another horrible problematic thing, they were expecting the births to be filmed and shown on television. Now, Jill was not wanting that. I understand. Giving birth is a very private moment, and when you're in pain, I'm one of those people where if I stub my toe, the whole world better get quiet because I'm in pain and getting through it, okay? I can't even imagine giving birth and required to be filmed. They were apparently given cameras and they were supposed to film this because, again, like, apparently this is just a requirement for them to do. And when you're in a system that's so culty and controlling, of course you do it because literally that's all you know. And honestly, I can't blame her because, you know, how hard is it to break out of a system where that's literally all you knew growing up? And then additionally, Jill actually vocalized how she found out that her dad apparently was forging her signatures even when she was an adult, even on paperwork that she didn't even know anything about. Jim Bob actually hit a point where he was thinking about giving them a lump sum, which is of course nothing compared to the trauma that they've experienced and nothing compared to the compensation they deserve. He wanted to give them a lump sum on the condition that they sign more paperwork and stay on to essentially make Jim Bob more money from what we could see. This documentary covered so many fascinating topics, and just the way that it was discussed was just absolutely insane. Like, honestly, hearing all these things that I'm telling you guys, it's no wonder I had to watch it a second time because I was just insanely shocked at the crazy shit that these poor kids went through. Now, I know we are still on the very long and drawn out conversation about all of the abuse and horrible things that the kids went through, but another kind of weird thing that happened that I thought was very controlling and odd was courting. So if you guys don't know what that is, let me break it down for you, okay? So courting was essentially where a parent is like, oh my God, hey, you know, I like you, you're a good person, I have a daughter and you have a son. What if they court together if they like each other? You know what I mean? And if they agreed and if parents gave permission, then the kids could essentially, I call it dating, but it was courting, okay? It wasn't even fully dating, let's be real here. So they had to have chaperones. They were only allowed to do a little bit of touching, like side hugs and things like that. They were supposed to save themselves for marriage and be super duper pure, and they were hardly allowed to, pretty much from what I could see, do a lot to get to know each other, really. And then finally, they could possibly get married if everyone was cool with it and down, but still, the concept of ownership over the girls specifically still stood, and it was very weird and culty. Now, honestly, I'm going to tell you right now, raise your hand or comment down below if you had a parent that would point out someone to you or was like, ooh, that person looks nice, or that one looks great for you, you would already be like, absolutely not, right? Or imagine your parent picking someone out for you. Yeah, some of you were like, oh, no. Mom, you're watching this right now. I know you're watching this right now, but there was a couple people back in my day that you were like, ooh, that person looks nice. Are we looking at the same person? What the hell? All jokes, okay? But you know what I'm saying? That's weird, okay? But that was a normal thing. Now, speaking of courting, that was something that was really shown a lot in the Duggars show. That's what Josh and Anna did, which if you remember, Josh is the shitty predator and Anna is his wife now. We saw that a lot in the show. Now, with courting, there were some very odd things about that too that I want to talk about. When it comes to marriage, though, the conversations about sex, oh my God. Now, you guys know I'm a very sex positive individual. I'm also very adamant about being very vocal about this, talking about that, breaking stigmas, because sex is literally as every day as folding laundry. There should not be any shame as long as it is between consenting adults. Who gives a However, the topic of sex was super taboo and super hidden. When the time for the sex talk came around, first of all, sex education was like non-existent. But when the conversation was happening, apparently it was like right before they were going to get married, and they were given educational information about sex. And you know what was involved with this? This educational information pretty much talked about one position, which take a wild guess which one that was. I'm sure it's not reverse cowgirl. I don't even want to picture that. That's gotta be boring as hell. And apparently there was some tips on how to give a hand job, which I'm gonna tell you right now, I know that must have been horrible. And there was more requirements and things about women, specifically for the woman and the wife to be available at all times, whenever, for her husband. She didn't really have a say in anything, and she didn't really have a say in control of her own body. She just had to be readily available to her husband. Again, abusive, not okay, and very fucked up. So additionally, with always being completely available to your husband, you also were completely responsible for his emotions. And there was a lot of encouragement in these teachings about how if you were behaving good, if you were doing things good, then, you know, your husband and everything else would be fine. But if he was upset, then you need to adjust. You needed to make that work. It was just so horrific and abusive and enabling of abusers. And a statement that was made in the documentary was discussing how this was the perfect area to set someone up to be a victim of abuse and train them to think it's normal, but also setting up abusers as well. And also a big important thing that was really pushed was loyalty, and loyalty was especially shown during the hard times and trials, and you were supposed to be loyal to your partner no matter what. And with that though is when we get into and back into Josh and Anna Duggar. Quick recap so no one forgets. Josh is the piece of shit predator and Anna is his wife. Now, from what we have seen, Anna was essentially grown up in the same belief system, and honestly, I think she was 100% brainwashed to think that she has to do this, and she's like, this is all she is good for. This absolutely horrific part, we are talking about what finally was exposed about Josh Duggar. So Josh Duggar was arrested because he was under investigation for a good while, and his investigation was child porn. Again, this is a very, very sensitive subject, so please try through this lightly. There are timestamps again, friendly reminder. He was consuming, downloading, and being a part of receiving child porn. Now, actually, they were able to pinpoint, according to a YouTuber, they have a series called Fundie Fridays, and they actually were discussing on the documentary about how you could actually pinpoint when Josh was receiving and getting this type of horrible content. So he was very good with tech and knew exactly how to have everything stored properly, essentially. There's some of the shots that I saw in the documentary, and this was a lot. There was a specific scene that was showing words in files that was describing some of the porn that was on his drive. And some of these statements was ranging from 3 months old, tortured, screaming, and pain. People that are into that deserve the worst of the worst. And I truly hope the worst of the worst happens to him while he is in prison, because spoiler, and happily, he was charged with 1 count of child pornography and was sentenced to 12.5 years, which personally don't think that's long enough. Now, during this trial, though, it was very, very overwhelming. And of course, Jill actually discussed how she was willing to testify. Of course, no victim wants to have to testify and discuss this. It's already traumatizing as it is. They didn't have to actually use her testimony. However, Jim Bob actually decided to get onto the stand, and every time he was questioned, he was very adamant to very wavering and pretty much claimed that he forgot even when he was told about his own words. For example, there was a report that discussed his own words about his son touching his younger daughters, and apparently he's like, oh, I don't recall, or I don't know, or I don't remember. So he wasn't allowed back in after that because his memory was apparently too bad. I can't even imagine being one of his daughters who is a victim and seeing how your dad doesn't outright call this her out, do anything. He was more adamant about his image from what I could see than protecting his daughters or be supportive. And speaking of not even being adamant for supportive, during all of this and the trial, Jim Bob was literally getting back in politics again. What the fuck are you doing being involved with politics and not being there as a support system for your daughters who were abused? It's overall a horrifically tragic story. I want to kind of wrap this up with final conversations about the documentary that really stood out to me, that actually, funny enough, has inspired me to expand my content even further and talk about other very dark and problematic things. So the conversation about the very extremist, crazy shit that's on the internet has not stopped there. It's not an old perspective. There's many people on the internet now who actually, funny enough, one of the examples was Brittany Dawn, who we've covered before on my channel. There are TikTokers and other people who are absolute extreme, very unhealthy individuals who go on and air out these perspectives that are controlling, manipulative, enabling of abuse, and so much more. And also downright wrong and inhumane. And a lot of them, and actually crazy enough, there's many people that are my age. Again, I'm 23 years old. So there are younger individuals who are a part of Gen Z who are starting to talk about this and make it interesting and trendy and trying to bring this belief into the world when it's literally part of the teachings of Bill Gothard. Now, this stuff is not normal. This stuff is not okay. And this is a severe problem. And seeing that and seeing the sheer amount of crazy, unhinged, and illogical people who are pushing this mentality and trying to, honestly, in my opinion, brainwash individuals, it honestly made me think about how much of a problem this is. And this documentary honestly has inspired me to start tackling this kind of stuff far more. Again, I know I talk about problematic things and I always find a new rabbit hole to fall down into, but this woke me up to how this is such a severe problem because these individuals are also influencing people when it comes to so many perspectives and pushing false information, pushing pseudosciences, for example, and not actually being humane, fighting against people's human rights, and so much more. And these types of people do not deserve a platform, in my opinion, if you are going to misinform people. But additionally, this stuff needs to be combated because it's a real life problem. And additionally, another very dangerous thing that was talked about in the last bit of the documentary was just the fact that there was an entire political agenda essentially behind the Duggars' motives. And the goal was to get as many of your children out into politics and to vote and to bring awareness and all of these things, except for the beliefs are taking us back in time, assisting in removing many different people's human rights, hurting people that are part of the LGBTQ plus community, impacting people's right to choose over their bodies, and so much more. Just overall stripping human rights and control and literal freedoms for their own beliefs. And even trying to make it to where Christianity is the sole belief for our country, which is absolutely unhinged, because again, if you want to be religious, that's fine and dandy, but I am in no way religious, and your religion should not dictate what the I do in my everyday life. That's not normal or right. That's flat out wrong, period.
And on the flip side of things, that does not mean that anyone who is religious or even non-religious should be able to go out of their way and get away with abuse, neglect, spreading misinformation, preventing people from having access to their human rights, and so much more. You should not be able to put the label of, well, it's my belief system and my religious beliefs to be able to enable yourselves to abuse people and hurt others. That's not how that should work.
But they've encouraged and trying to push people to get into office and into important political positions of power, which could honestly impact so many different people. Now, last but not least, final thoughts with this entire documentary was, first of all, I think Jill was extremely brave. I think we really should be giving props to people who are getting out of cults, getting out of abusive relationships, families, situations, and up organized religious systems just like that. That's insanely impressive, and I'm so proud of her for speaking up. Also, another wonderful thing was Ginger actually spoke up. So another child of the Duggars discussed and has publicly discussed on her social media platforms the problems and things that she's gone through. I'm going to be honest, due to this documentary, I feel very, very nervous for the children and other individuals who are still under the control, essentially, of Jim, Bob, and Michelle. I wonder if there's going to be some restriction on if the younger siblings can see the older siblings, and I'm also quite nervous if there's going to be more restriction to try and essentially further brainwash those poor children. I'm very proud of everyone for airing out this information. And last but not least, the exploitation and everything going on when it comes to people who were a part of the Duggars or not. Either way, this entire system is so dark, and this documentary truly aired out that there's so much more happening right now. So honestly, I really want to encourage everyone to go watch the documentary if you can. So that was it for my discussion and recap over everything that I learned, and so much more happening in this. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, and I will see my angels in the next video. Bye.